This Friday, the country will remember the first anniversary of the London bombings. We've heard many stories about the rescue work the emergency services carried out that day. But what is less well known is that alongside them were volunteer ministers from Scientology. This morning, the 5 Live report goes undercover to investigate how, from the London bombings to Ground Zero, volunteer ministers from Scientology travel the world, providing what they claim is effective help in times of peril. We also reveal how the world's biggest single terrorist attack became an opportunity for one big recruitment drive.
So at Ground Zero then, they wanted to keep psychiatrists or other forms of counseling out of the activities there.
And how conventional psychiatrists are under fire from the Scientologists.
If you start off in an organisation which begins with a science fiction novel as the basis for its beliefs of the world and the universe, and from that point of view is proposing to criticise, say, the way in which we understand the schizophrenias in 2006, I'm afraid I'm not going to take part in the conversation.
Well, investigating this for the 5 Live report were Elodie Harper and Naomi McMullen. And Elodie joins me this morning. Morning, Elodie. We've all heard of Scientology. Just remind us what it is.
Well, firstly, although it's often called a church, officially it actually isn't, or certainly not in this country, as the Charities Commission denied it that right in 1999 as it failed to promote, in their words, moral or spiritual welfare.
You went undercover to a meeting of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. Now, what exactly is that?
Well, we went to 3 meetings of the CCHR, or Citizens Commission of Human Rights, which is a wing of Scientology dedicated to fighting psychiatry, which it says is the reason why our society is failing. And watching over us while we met was an imposing 6-foot-high portrait of L. Ron Hubbard, which dominated the meeting room, along with rows and rows of his books.
Right, so how is this linked to their work on the 7th of July last year?
Well, CCHR believes that mental illnesses, including post-traumatic stress disorder, don't actually exist, but are just a fraud invented by psychiatrists as part of a plan to gain social control. And they also believe psychiatrists, or psychs as they call them, are so dangerous that Scientology actually has a duty to protect the public from them in times of crisis. And we discovered that was exactly what they tried to do on the streets of London on the day of the bombings almost 12 months ago.
I was reading on the CCHR website how, CCHR went out after 9/11.
Right, yeah.
Go to the site and say, look, you don't have to go to a psychiatrist.
That was a volunteer minister.
That was volunteer minister. Did they do anything like that after the London bombings?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
We had a yellow van, which was going
We all
around
went.
to help.
We were all there. Fighting the psychiatrists, keeping the psychs
do you
away.
think you got through to people?
On 7/7.
Yeah.
What you just heard there was Paul Fletcher telling us that he and other Scientologists were keeping the psychs away when they went to help trauma victims amongst all the chaos of the day. And Stefania jokingly refers to it as a type of spiritual security needed to save people from the threat of receiving psychological counselling. We spoke to one survivor of the 7/7 bombings who has some mental health training and was also approached by Scientologists after the disaster. They didn't want to be identified, but they did tell us how they were shocked that they and fellow survivors were targeted by Scientologists trying to recruit them and talking of Dianetics therapy as if it were a medically recognised form of therapy. In the days after the attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001, the National Mental Health Association in America warned people, in their words, to beware of Scientologists claiming to be mental health experts after they flooded the disaster zone with their volunteer ministers, who are the sort of worker ants of the organisation. We spoke to the NMHA, who did confirm this to us, and we also spoke to Bruce Hines, who is now an ex-Scientologist after 30 years in the organisation, and he was one of those ordered to Lower Manhattan on the morning of September the 11th.
Scientologists believe that they have the only answers to problems of the mind and the spirit and that sort of thing, and that no one else does, including other religions. They will say that they accept other religions, but in reality they think only Scientologists have the answers. Starting way back in the 50s, L. Ron Hubbard began attacking psychiatry, and there's been sort of a battle going on ever since then. They've stated several times they want to destroy psychiatry. At Ground Zero then, they wanted to keep psychiatrists or other forms of counseling out of the activities there.
And alarmingly, he also told 5 Live that he wasn't only told to keep medically trained counsellors away.
I know there was organized buses coming up from Florida where there's a large Scientology center, lots from California and from all around. So it ended up that there were hundreds going down there probably every day. The idea was to get as many people as possible in yellow T-shirts down at Ground Zero, because the yellow T-shirts are very visible, just sort of to make an impact that way. And there's always a hope that someone who gets involved will then continue with Scientology.
We're going to bring a guest in at this stage. Dr. Max Pemberton is here. He's a psychiatric doctor and journalist who last year also went undercover to report on the organisation. Max, good morning to you. Bruce Hines explained there how, as a volunteer minister, he took advantage of the situation to keep out trained psychiatric helpers, as he put it. But does it become more sinister when he says that they use the disaster to recruit and actually convert people caught up in them?
Yes, it does. People directly after such an awful event are in shock. They're incredibly vulnerable. It seems to me very sinister that Scientology appears to be specifically targeting those individuals in society who are vulnerable, whether this is because they've just survived a traumatic event or because they have long-standing mental health problems. I feel very uneasy at the idea that Scientology appears to be taking advantage of catastrophes by using them as recruitment venues.
Because there's a situation there that was alluded to whereby Scientologists are treating trauma victims. Now, what do you make of that?
Well, I'm very disturbed to hear that Scientologists are treating trauma victims when they actually don't even believe in post-traumatic stress disorder. Of course, we psychiatrists aren't infallible, and in particular, psychiatric medication shouldn't be seen as a panacea to all forms of mental illness. But it is a medically recognised treatment which is subject to rigorous peer review. And if Scientologists advocate getting rid of psychiatric treatment for trauma victims, I'd like to know what they're going to offer instead.
Also with us is Ian Howarth, who's from the Cult Information Centre and joins us here on the Riverbank. Ian, good morning. Thank you for coming along.
Good morning.
We should stress straight away we are not talking about a cult here. Or do you think we are?
Well, if I was to answer that question, I might have to appear in court, because Scientology, like other groups, are well known for being highly litigious. So let's just say that we're talking about a group about which we're very concerned.
All right. Why should we be concerned when somebody is converted to Scientology, in your mind?
Again, one has to be cautious as to what one says, but what I would say is that in 27 years of working full-time as a specialist in this field, I've had many hundreds of calls of complaint from families and friends of loved ones who've become involved in
what
people.
Keeps them there?
Again, we're getting into a difficult area. If we forget Scientology and we talk about the area that we specialize in, which is cults, then by definition a cult is a group that uses psychologically coercive techniques to recruit people. And this is normally achieved, i.e. the control of the individual is normally achieved in the average cult in 3 or 4 days. So that the argument is for a typical cult that the cult member no longer can exercise free will and can no longer choose to leave. Those that have contacted me about their concerns for loved ones in Scientology have indicated that these people have changed, in their opinion, changed for the worse. They are usually alienated from the family, or will be as time goes by, and they want help. They want to understand this better, and they want to look at ways forward. For those people that have been successful in, shall we say, rescuing loved ones from that group, however the loved ones have come out, they've normally taken a tremendously long time to recover. In fact, the researchers Conway and Siegelman published back in January of 1982 in Science Digest an article called Information Disease, and according to their research, the average person leaving Scientology took 25.6 months to recover.
Have you dealt with Scientologists specifically and face-to-face over some of the issues you've just discussed?
I've certainly, in 27 years, had a lot of dealings with the Scientology organization. In fact, I helped the police in Canada, the Ontario Provincial Police, in the form of Sergeant Ciampini back in the early 80s. He was very interested in and concerned about Scientology and wanted my help and any advice I could give him and contact with ex-members to see what might be going on behind the scenes. He contacted many people, and it led to the biggest raid in Canadian history, where 100 police officers raided the headquarters of Scientology. It led to criminal charges, and so today Scientology in Canada is seen to be the first religion with a criminal record.